There's a weird point in our life that nobody really prepares you for. And honestly, I think a lot of people in their late teens and early 20s are sitting in it right now. It's the moment where everybody around you slowly starts moving forward, and somehow you feel like you stayed in the exact same place. Like one day you look around and everybody's life just looks different. People are getting apartments, people are getting engaged, people are posting new cars, jobs, college graduations, trips, new friend groups, and meanwhile, we're just sitting there wondering how it feels like everybody figured life out except us. And what makes it worse is that nobody really talks about it. Because online, everybody either acts completely successful or completely destroyed, and there's never really any in between. But the truth is, most people are just confused. Most people are acting like they know what they're doing. Most people are just trying to survive long enough to hopefully build something better. And I think that's what hit me the hardest over the past couple of years. Because after high school, life got weird. Not even bad necessarily, just weird. Growing up, life feels structured. You wake up, you go to school, you see the same people, you have sports, you have routines, you have summers, you have weekends. Everything feels connected. Then one day, it all just ends. And nobody really explains what happens after that. You just kind of get thrown into real life. And suddenly, nobody cares if you're confused. Bills still exist, responsibilities still exist, pressure still exists, and even if I'm being honest, I feel like most of us felt like growing up would feel more exciting than it actually does. Instead, it's a lot of quiet nights, a lot of overthinking, a lot of wondering if you're wasting time. And one of the hardest things we realize is nobody's coming to save us. And I don't mean that in some fake motivational way. I mean literally. At some point, you realize if your life is gonna improve, it's probably gonna come from your own decisions, your own habits, your own consistency, and that's difficult because motivation is temporary. People online love talking about discipline, but nobody talks about how hard discipline actually is when your life feels repetitive, when every day feels the same, when progress feels invisible, when your videos barely get any views, when your business is slow, when your bank account isn't where you want it, when your friends stop replying, when you feel mentally exhausted. That's the part nobody posts. And honestly, I've had a lot of moments where I question myself too. Especially after seeing other people succeed faster, that comparison stuff will destroy you if you let it. Social media completely warps your perception of reality. You start thinking everybody's rich, everybody's happy, everybody's winning. Meanwhile, half the people posting those pictures are stressed out as well. But nobody uploads the nights where they feel lost. Nobody uploads the moments when they're sitting in silence wondering if they're wasting years of their life. And I think one of the biggest lies we were sold growing up is that life moves in a straight line. Like if you just do everything correctly, everything magically works out immediately. And that is not the case. Sometimes you work hard and nothing changes for months, maybe even years. Sometimes you feel behind. Sometimes you make a bad decision. Sometimes you lose momentum. You outgrow people. Sometimes you realize the version of yourself from 2 years ago wouldn't even recognize who you are now. And honestly, I think that's part of growing up. You slowly realize life is less about having everything figured out and more about learning how to keep moving even when you don't. Because if there's one thing I've noticed, the people who eventually win usually aren't the most talented. They're the people that didn't quit. They're the people that stayed consistent. That's literally it sometimes. Staying consistent. They stayed consistent long enough for their life to finally change. Consistency sounds simple until you actually try doing it. Consistency gets boring. That's the truth. People love the idea of success. Very few people love the idea of repetition. Very few people love waking up and doing the same thing over and over with no guarantee it's even gonna work. That's where most people stop. And honestly, I understand why. There's moments where you genuinely feel stupid for trying, especially online. You upload a video you spent hours on and it gets no views. You start a business, nobody cares. You try improving yourself, nobody notices. And eventually your brain starts asking, what's the point? But I think the scary thing is, most people quit right before their life changes. Not because they weren't capable, but because they got tired of feeling invisible. And I think about that a lot. Imagine if every version of you from the past could see you right now. The 15-year-old version, the 17-year-old version, the version of you that stayed up late thinking about your future. Would they think you completely failed? Or would they just think you're still figuring it out? Because there's a difference. I think a lot of people are way too hard on themselves, especially young guys. A lot of men right now genuinely feel lost. And nobody really talks about it seriously. Everyone jokes about it. There's a real loneliness happening right now in America. A lot of people don't have direction. A lot of people don't feel respected. A lot of people feel replaceable. And even when you combine that with social media constantly showing everybody's highlight reel, it creates this constant pressure that you should already be successful at 20 years old, which is insane when you really think about it. You're barely starting life. But the internet will make you feel like that if you're not rich by 20, you've already failed. And that mindset destroys people. Because instead of building slowly, people panic. They compare. They rush decisions. They force lifestyles they can't afford. And half the time they're trying to impress people they don't even like. I think one of the biggest things I've learned recently is peace is underrated. Seriously. Being able to wake up without constant chaos in your life is underrated. Having a small group of real friends is underrated. Working towards something quietly is underrated. Not every part of your life needs to be posted online. And honestly, some of the strongest people you know are building their lives in silence. No attention, no validation, no applause, just consistency. That's it. And I think deep down, most people know what they need to do. They just don't want to accept how long it might take. And that's the hard truth. Everybody wants the result. Very few people want the timeline. Because the timeline is uncomfortable. It's lonely, it's repetitive, it requires patience, and even patience is difficult when you feel behind. But if you keep comparing your beginning to somebody else's middle, you're always going to feel like you're losing. And honestly, I had to stop doing that to myself. Because there's always somebody doing something better. Always. There's always somebody making more money, somebody getting more views, somebody being more successful than you are, somebody more attractive. It never ends. Eventually you have to ask yourself, what life do I actually want? Not what looks impressive online, not what gets attention, not what makes strangers think you're successful. What actually makes you fulfilled? Because those are two completely different things. And I think a lot of people chase validation thinking it'll fix their life. But validation fades fast. You get the car? Cool. Then what? You get followers? Cool. Then what? If you're still unhappy internally, none of that fixes the problem. And I think that's why a lot of people feel empty even after accomplishing things they thought would change everything. External success doesn't automatically create internal peace. That's something completely different. Honestly, I still don't have everything figured out. I still overthink. I still have days where I feel behind. I still have moments where I question what I'm doing. I think the difference now is that I stopped expecting to feel perfect all the time. Because growth isn't supposed to feel comfortable. Maybe confusion is part of becoming something better. Maybe the reason so many people stay stuck is because they quit during the uncomfortable phase. And if that's true, then maybe feeling lost doesn't mean your life is over. Maybe it just means you're in transition. And honestly, I think a lot of us are. I think there's an entire generation right now trying to figure out how to build meaningful lives in a world that constantly distracts them. And that's not easy. Attention spans are destroyed, comparison is constant, everybody's addicted to stimulation. Nobody sits still anymore. Nobody thinks deeply anymore. And because of that, people slowly lose connection with themselves. That's why I think it's important to spend time alone sometimes. Not isolated forever, but enough to actually hear your own thoughts, listen to your own words, enough to figure out who you are when nobody else is around. Because if you don't know yourself, the world will try to decide for you. And honestly, some of the biggest changes in my life came from quiet moments. Some alone time, driving, thinking, in the shower, alone, late nights, random thoughts, not huge dramatic moments, just small realizations stacking over time. And maybe that's how life changes. Not instantly, not overnight, just gradually, with momentum, with small wins, one better decision at a time, one productive day at a time, one less distraction at a time. And eventually, your life starts to look different. Not because you became a completely different person overnight, but because you stayed committed long enough for growth to finally become visible. That's probably the hardest part. Growth is invisible at first. Nobody claps for consistency in the beginning. Most progress happens quietly, and if you need constant validation to keep going, you'll probably stop. That's why you have to build something deeper than motivation. You need standards, you need purpose, you need a reason bigger than the temporary feelings. Because feelings change every day. Some days you feel inspired, other days you feel exhausted. But your habits eventually decide your future more than your emotions do. And honestly, I'm saying this to myself too, because I think everybody needs reminders, especially when life feels repetitive, especially when progress feels slow, especially when you feel like everybody else is moving faster than you. The truth is, you probably still have way more time than you think. Your life is not over because you're confused in your 20s. That's normal. You're not a failure because you're still building. You're not behind because your path looks different. And you're definitely not lazy just because you're mentally exhausted. People aren't lazy. Sometimes they're overwhelmed. Sometimes they're discouraged. Sometimes they've lost momentum, and momentum can be rebuilt. That's the most important part. Your current situation does not have to become your permanent life, but eventually you do have to make a decision. You either keep waiting for your life to magically change, or you'll slowly start changing it for yourself, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's slow, even if nobody notices at first. Because 5 years from now, you're gonna wish you started. And honestly, maybe this is the year things finally start to change for you. Not because of luck, not because somebody saved you, but because you finally got tired of staying the same. And that's where real change starts. Not with motivation, with frustration, with finally realizing you want more out of your life. And if you're watching this right now feeling stuck, just know you're definitely not the only one. A lot of people are trying to rebuild themselves right now, quietly, one day at a time. And maybe that's enough for now. Maybe you don't need your whole life figured out this second. Maybe you just need to keep going, even when it feels slow, especially when it feels slow. Because one day you'll look back at this version of yourself and realize this phase is where everything started changing. You just couldn't see it yet.